Hey, welcome to today's video. Today I'm talking about how to let go of grief for good. Now this is somewhat of a touchy subject. A lot of people don't like to talk about grief because it's so sensitive, but I'm gonna go there anyways. Great thing about YouTube and videos and podcasts is if you don't like it, you can just skip it. So essentially, here's what it comes down to. In order to become free of feeling grief, we need to allow ourselves to feel it. Now, I know that sounds simple enough, but resistance is the fuel that keeps emotions going. And in order for us to stop resisting these emotions, we need to bring awareness to what survival patterns, what programs we have created to protect ourselves from feeling that pain. Okay, so I can probably best describe this with examples. When I was 9 years old, as you know, if you've been following my content, my mom died when I was 9 of colon cancer. And I can remember the moment when I walked into the funeral home and saw my mom there in the casket. And the grief was debilitating. Like, it was so painful. So much so that I literally almost dropped to my knees. My dad grabbed me and put me in a chair. And then I can remember family and friends and relatives coming up to me. And every single one of those people that came up to me was doing exactly what my ego was doing. They were saying things to me to try and pull me out of the grief. Things like, your mother was the most amazing person, she impacted so many people, she will be missed, these types of things. And ultimately what they were trying to do, and this is, I'm not ripping on them here, I'm grateful that they were there, but what they were trying to do is they saw this kid who was hurting, and they didn't want him to hurt anymore. And they tried pulling me out of the state of grief. And my ego, which is just essentially our mind unobserved, was doing the exact same thing. My ego immediately went to work to start to create survival patterns so that I never felt the pain that I felt that moment, that day when my mom passed away, when I walked into that funeral home. So what patterns did I create to never feel that pain again? Well, one of my patterns was becoming closed off, becoming a little bit more recluse, not letting people in as close, becoming way more serious. This is just to name a few. So this one instance, and obviously it's a big instance, if a 9-year-old kid's losing his mother, it's a big instance. But this one instance, my life was completely molded and shaped by the death of my mother and my ego's, desire, my ego's automatic response to protect me from ever feeling that pain again. And this led ultimately to me being kind of like a cold person. I didn't let people in. I didn't allow love into my life. I didn't allow joy into my life. And later on, through the process of spiritual growth and spiritual development, I was able to realize that I was blocking all of the good. And the reason that I was blocking the good is because I didn't ever want to allow myself to have that good ripped away. But once I was able to realize this, then I was able to do probably one of the hardest things that I had to do on the path towards growing spiritually was I had to take myself back and allow myself to feel that pain fully as my 9-year-old self. And this is extremely hard to do because this one simple fact is that our ego has become really, really proficient at preventing us from feeling this pain. And when I was doing this, I was 33 years old, so there's a huge span. And Dr. Joe Dispenza says that neurons that fire together wire together. And ultimately, a visual that I could create for you there is like just driving down the same path in a tractor every single day. Every single day, my ego was driving down the same path, keeping me in the same pattern, the same loop, where I was experiencing the same problems over and over again. And when I tried as a 33-year-old to go back there and get out of those ruts, it was extremely difficult because the mind, the ego, had done such a great job of protecting me from ever feeling that pain again. So when I said, hey, I'm ready to go back there, the ego was like, no way, we're going back there. So reconnecting with the grief, the way I felt it as a 9-year-old was extremely difficult because I had created all these adult rationalizations and justifications about why about the grief, about how I felt. So it was really hard for me to get back there. But eventually, as I continued through this process, I continued to connect to the emotion. And some days I would connect and it would be I wouldn't feel it fully. I wouldn't connect fully. And some days I would get really deep and really, really connect to the emotion. And with time and with practice, eventually there came to a point in this journey of trying to become free of this grief, where I was sitting in a group meditation actually, and there's so much power in groups. And that's why I've converted a lot of my coaching material into groups, because we benefit from the collective consciousness of the entire group. So when I was sitting on my own, I only have me and God essentially to guide me and work on releasing this emotion. But when I connect with more people, I have the support of a group, the power that exists when we can come together in groups. And this is the power that has created great movements, the power behind AA and these types of things. Before AA came around, there was really no cure for alcoholism or addiction. It was through the power of groups and through the unconditional love of AA that people were finally able to break free from addictions, which before AA they thought there was no cure. So I'm in a group meditation, and this moment comes to me where I walked into my grandmother. She's an old German woman, and she called my Oma, and I walked into her house for the first time after my mother had died, before the funeral and everything. And so the grief that I thought I was supposed to be dealing with was in the funeral home, but there was a moment even before then, which was this moment when I walked into my grandmother's house, and she says in her German accent, she says, "We lost the mamo." And in that moment, I wanted just to break down and cry and just like hug her. But the ego went to work to prevent me from feeling the pain. And I went into the bathroom. And in the bathroom, I just collected myself so that I didn't show the emotion. And in that moment, in this meditation, this is all happening in the meditation, it comes to me that, oh, this is it. This is what I'm here to let go of. This is my opportunity now to let go of this grief. And as I began to connect to the grief, it was powerful. And it wasn't even like I was sobbing or anything along those lines. It was that energy of grief that had been stored really deep down low. And if you're into chakras and things like that, stored into the sacral chakra. And it began moving up my body. And I was experiencing this dramatic relief. But as I began to experience this dramatic relief, I also began to notice all of the other emotions and all the other patterns that were created from the suppression and the repression of this grief. One of them was there was anger. I was angry that I was unable to show my emotions. I was angry at my brother because I thought that if I showed my emotions, he might get mad at me or he might make fun of me. There was guilt for not allowing myself to let my mother go fully. And you can see all of the layers that I had to go through. And one of my students actually came up with an amazing analogy about the process of letting go. And it's kind of like a ship anchored at sea, but it's not anchored with just one anchor. It's anchored with multiple anchors. And in this meditation, I was just pulling every single anchor out. There was guilt, there was anger, there was shame, there was grief, there was sadness, there was hurt. And I was just pulling these anchors up, and it was this amazing experience of becoming free of this grief once and for all. Let me just give you one other example. And before I do that, I want to just describe what this process is. This process is learning to connect fully to an emotion without resisting it. It is in the resistance that we keep emotions going. So I've given this example a million times, and I give it again. If you're scared of heights, and you can't even step up on one rung on the ladder, just move towards the ladder. And once you start to feel the fear come over the body, then just stay with it. Don't allow the mind to wander away. You've been avoiding stepping on this ladder your entire life, so stay with the fear. Once the fear subsides, then take one step up on the ladder. And this is essentially the process that I went through with grief, only it took me about 5 years to finally become free of this grief from the loss of my mother. And that grief had created the avoidance of feeling that grief had created all kinds of problems in my life. Problems with addiction, problems with relationships, problems with not letting people in, problems with blocking joy, problems with escaping through overworking. Like it was just endless, the issues that holding on to this grief created for me in my life. So in this process, I learned how to let go of this grief and become free of it. And Years later, I had a little dog. Lola was her name, my wife's dog, and that dog was like, she was so important to us, and it was like our child. And she ended up passing away. And I can remember a moment when my brother-in-law was over, and he basically said to me, you know, like, what happened? And I remember like holding back the tears, and I was in that exact same spot again in the bathroom, and I allowed myself to go through that again and suppress the grief once again. And I found myself a few months later saying, oh, I never dealt with the grief from the loss of the dog, because every time I looked back on the dog, all I could see was the final moments and all of the sadness that was associated with those final moments. So a couple of months after my dog died, my cat ended up dying. My cat was 19 years old, and she was this like super personable cat, had more personality than any cat I'd ever met. And that day, after we ended up putting the cat down, and after that day, I told my wife, I'm like, just leave the house. I'm like, just go. I need like an hour to like just sit with this. And I did the process. The grief was right there on the surface. I hadn't created any programs to not feel it anymore. And I was aware of the patterns that I had experienced from the past because of the work I had done from becoming free of the grief and the loss of my mother. And I just allowed myself to fully lean into the pain of losing my cat. And to my surprise, it only lasted about 5 minutes. And then after that 5 minutes was up, I was free from it. And now every time I look back on the cat, I think of just all of the crazy antics that she used to do. We have an island in the center of our kitchen. She would jump on it all the time. And these are the memories that I have of the cat. I don't think about the sadness. I think about all of the good that happened. And I can only do that because I was able to fully tune into that grief. And I'm now experiencing that same thing with my mother. I also went back and did the same process with letting go of the grief from the loss of my dog. This is how we become free of the grief, is we just stop avoiding. And I know that seems like too simple of an answer, and it almost is, because there are layers to go through, layers of the onion that we need to go through to finally get to the core and to finally become free of this. The good news is, if you're experiencing grief right now from the loss of somebody close to you that happened recently, now is your opportunity. Don't let 20 years pass by and dig these deep ruts. Don't let the neurons fire together and wire together so that you have to work really hard to become free of this grief in the future. If it's on the surface right now, allow yourself to lean into it, to fully feel it without judging it, without rationalizing it, without saying they lived a good life, any of that. Just allow yourself to feel it fully. And this is how we become free of grief. And actually, this is how we become free of any emotion. If you're struggling in the process of letting go, just head on over to my website. You can also join my Letting Go Prep School Facebook group. I'll add some links in here to do that. And this is what we discussed. The process of letting go is the process of spiritual growth. It is the process of moving up, the scale of consciousness. It is, the sun is always shining within us. High states of consciousness, peace, joy, love, compassion, they're already within us, but our ego has created clouds and it's preventing that light from shining. And we want to become aware of what those clouds are and clear those clouds so that our light can shine at all times. And this is what I help people do every single day. So if you're interested in learning more about what I do, if you're interested in finding out if you think I can help you, just click the link in this video